Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dave Genachowski. I'm an enterprise architect at M&T Bank. Been in the industry about 20 years between banking, healthcare. I focus a lot on the bank around the commercial space, treasury, credit, and also on our digital front. And I focus a lot on payments too. And before we get into some of the details around what we're going to be talking about, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Kecin Smithburger.
Hi, I'm Kecin Smithburger, head of service delivery at M&T Bank. Have over roughly basically over 15 years experience in the integration and data space. Various industries as well, between healthcare, the financial space, as well as aerospace engineering and manufacturing. And throughout different times, I've been doing different things within the integration and data space. In addition to that, current focus that I have right now is really driving out and continuing down the SOA area from an integration technologies perspective, upgrading technologies within the space as M&T is continuing to look and move forward into the next evolution of integration, and additionally moving forward the APIs. It's been a drive here that we've been focusing on in the last year, 2 years, go say.
So a little bit of who M&T Bank is. M&T Bank is a regional bank. We're found in Buffalo, New York, and it really doesn't snow all the time, okay? A lot of people think it snows all the time in Buffalo. It does not. There's very nice seasons. But we're up in Buffalo, New York. We have expanded over time. We're about a $120 billion bank. We're throughout the region. We're in Pennsylvania, we're in Virginia, we're down in Baltimore, Maryland, recently into New Jersey. So we're a regional, bordering probably on a super regional. We focus on most of the traditional banking products, your commercial, retail, business banking. We also own Wilmington Trust, so we have a big trust business. So that's a little just about where M&T is. Again, regional focus, a lot of relationship banking, and that's a little bit about M&T. Going to go back a little bit here. Find my next slide. Talk a little bit about kind of how we started our journey. And one of the slides is missing. I'll skip that, but just talk about it. So what we're finding more and more, and this almost becomes outdated a little bit, is that we're finding ourselves in a digital first environment. Some people say mobile first, but with things like Alexa and voice and all that coming on board, what we're realizing is that people are interacting in different ways, especially with their financial institutions, if it's a mobile device, if it's voice, if it's traditional going into the bank. And that is driving some of our thinking and our mindset. And what we found out when I joined the bank about 2.5 years ago is that we were still very traditional, bank branch focused. We did have a mobile app and online, but it was a vendor mobile product, very limited in what we can do. But what we didn't have is the foundation to be able to change. And I think for the longest time, online banking was enough. Then people added mobile banking, and that seemed to be good. But in the last couple of years, the rate of change has accelerated that the way we were doing things would not allow us to be successful moving forward. So we realized we had to make some changes. And one of those key components that we realized was an API gateway. And before we were able to kind of secure one, we had a mobile project coming up and we realized that we needed one. But we weren't ready as an organization to make that investment. And that's a good thing. Because when we were thinking about an API gateway, we're also thinking about a different vendor at the time. And so what we had to do is kind of put in a point solution to be able to expose the services we needed to our mobile app. But it was only good for retail. That wouldn't service commercial, wealth, and our other business lines. And it didn't also give us a way to be more robust within the organization. So we were looking at an API gateway. And Kevin, I don't know if you can maybe talk a little bit about some of the specific capabilities we were looking for within that gateway.
Absolutely. So to further the points that Dave was talking to, we wanted an environment and a technology and a product that would allow us to enable multi-channel capabilities, as well as driving towards the idea that we'd have secure endpoints out to those channels. Whether that be something as maybe from a future perspective for M&T, as maybe from a fintech perspective, something of that nature from driving a future, but to as current as our digital banking and our mobile banking sites at this point, as well as to our app, exposing those out from that perspective. So really centralizing on a product and technology to drive standard interfacing in a way to drive those standards out was the major criteria.
Okay, great. So when we were boiling down, right, we had a lot of different criteria that we were looking at. And one of the things at first, when we first were looking at API gateways, there was a lot of confusion on, well, what is that? Is that a replacement for the ESB? Is that another integration layer? What does this do? And what we started to realize is that some of the competitors out in the marketplace were trying to be everything for all people, for all different groups. And maybe for some organization that's worked, but what I started to realize, along with some of our security folks, and some of them are in the audience today, is that the API gateway is also a security device. It plays a very fundamental role in security, and we've had quite a few CA security products, and one of my concerns was, how do I start to integrate this ecosystem together? And it felt more like that it was more connected to some of those other items than just about integration. It certainly can expose REST endpoints and do some, it can talk to SOAP and things like that, but there was more to that. So Kevin, I don't know if you can talk a little bit more in detail of some of our criteria that really drove our decision towards the gateway we chose.
Yeah, so going more into the criterion as well as what helped out with that criteria in the evaluation phase of that. So just kind of take it up one level. We actually put a team together that was combined of enterprise architecture, cybersecurity, security engineering, and our enterprise integration services group, and which was part of the shared services area, that brought those teams together to evaluate the software from all different aspects, not just one specific aspect of it. And also we had a list of criteria that we were looking at, mostly listed up here for the most part, but some of those were weighted differently, of course. To the point that Dave was making a little earlier here is that we really weren't looking for something to remove our ESB or replace our ESB. We're really looking for things such as the securing of our endpoints, for example. The other things we're looking at is governance around our services or APIs, and as well as the development portal aspect of it. So today, before we get the API gateway in-house, that was the governance in the API endpoints or the service endpoints. We really didn't have a good catalog or a way to catalog those, and that was a struggle really internally as people and developers tried to better understand what functionality we was offering. So these are some of the features, functionalities that we were looking to drive out and help out with, and so those are some of the things we added, put more weight towards. As some of the things we didn't put more weight towards, which is more of the ESB, your typical ESB capabilities, which is potentially service orchestration or business process orchestration type things. We already have tools in place for that, so we weren't looking for someone to replace those or anything to adhere or add. So we were looking for added value things.
Fantastic. I'm going to go back one slide here just really quick. I touched a little bit on this and kind of where we are as an organization on our journey of digital, starting from kind of low maturity, which is typically within your branch, to highly mature. We did launch our own mobile app. We're starting to add some additional functionality to that, like person-to-person payment, Zelle, if folks have maybe heard about that. That's kind of the financial industry's response to things like Google Wallet, Venmo. It's a bank-run person-to-person payment platform. And so we're kind of starting to go towards the external part. The reason why, even though we are exposing some of these obviously services, it's really to our mobile app alone, and we're not quite there. Now, when you get to the far end there, that's where you talk a little bit more about like open banking and things of that nature, where others could potentially be calling our services. For instance, I don't know if anybody uses Mint, but Mint does a lot of aggregation from screen scraping and things like that. We'd like to get to a point where we can able to offer our APIs for them to consume directly, so they can get our transaction, get the balances, and be able to add that value versus the way that they have been doing it. And I think with security coming as a big topic these days, I think some of the traditional ways people are getting some of this aggregated data might become more and more difficult, because we are much more concerned about how people are accessing our data, and so a lot of that multi-factor step-up authentication may start to impede those things. So again, on our journey, we got a while to go, but this is just kind of where we're at today. So Kevin, maybe you can talk a little bit about, it's a very busy slide, lots of things on it. Kevin will break it down for you. Yep. But maybe talk a little bit about our kind of conceptual architecture for the API gateway and how it fits within our ecosystem at the bank.
As we mentioned, we're not looking to replace an ESB or those types of things, but what we were looking to really do is to bring in a technology or product that would allow us to have interoperability with our current stack. And so to kind of run through this, we have our consumer applications, whether that's an application, a device, or a web service, or sorry, a web page that's available from our consumer's perspective, whether that's internal to the bank or branch, or something that's available externally. But really what we're focusing on from the CA API gateway is we're going to have an external gateway in our DMZ to secure it for basically any communication coming from external to internal, to secure that, make sure it's the right application consuming those services, and ensure that not the wrong person gets in the middle of those connectivity. Additionally, we're going to also have the internal gateway. And then from that point, we have our BPM systems, we have our ESB, we have CA single sign-on. And one of the interoperability pieces that we did, as far as some of the evaluation, we did a proof of technology. And part of that proof of technology was to prove out by pulling a product, and we had two different products, or competing products that we were looking at. We've got it down to that point. What we did is we brought those two in, and we actually looked at how it interacted with the CA single sign-on, and additionally to some of the other applications from an interoperability perspective. And so really that's what we're looking at in summary, is the internal and external gateway, and also communicating to our legacy, some of our legacy, quote-unquote legacy applications that we already had prior existing, and our prior investments that we had.
Great. And if you can notice on here, a couple things that, you see Redis cache up there at the top, right? A lot of the competitors on the marketplace will say, sure, we can integrate with an external caching engine. But some of the unique things we found during our evaluation is that's kind of almost out of the box for CA, where with some other competitors, yeah, you can do that with configuration, some coding, some professional services. And some of those things that's not where the value add is. I think one of the key themes, and we'll talk a little bit on the next slide, and on my intro slide, which I didn't leave up there too long, I kept saying that I look to use technology to solve business problems. One thing that came very evident at being at CA World is it's about business outcomes. And our jobs as technologists is to have good business outcomes, right? So by not having to worry about, gee, how do I integrate cache, or how do I tie into my single sign-on framework, when some of those things are there, that's really helpful because we can focus on the real problem, which may be being able to establish single sign-on for one of our new commercial apps, or being able to access a caching layer where we have profile data, things of that nature. We can focus on the real business outcome. So again, they seem like small things, but when you start to look at it as a whole, if somebody hasn't made a decision on what their API is, I strongly consider you to really look at CA, and it's beyond just APIs. So we're going to move a little bit more, a little bit of a busy slide. I will admit, I took some artifacts we used internally, brought them here, saved myself, self a little bit of time. But what I want to talk about are some of the use cases, right? So when we were trying to justify an API gateway, when we first started and I just had mobile, people are like, yeah, that's kind of a good idea, but is there another way to do it? Do we really have the lead time for this? Plus, we did have a vendor that was going under at the time for a mobile app, and there was a timeline that had to be met. Now, we always hear that, but we were in a time crunch. And retrospectively looking back, I'm glad we waited, because we probably wouldn't have wound up with CA. We probably would have wound up with a competitor and had gaps that we didn't know. So slowing down was a good thing. But some of our use cases are this. So as a bank, I've joined about 2.5 years ago, and I've been trying to be an agent of change, a little bit of a disruption. When I came there we always bought products. We didn't really build things always ourselves. And the first thing I worked on was, let's build our own mobile app. The next thing that I've done is cloud. We were looking at replacing our commercial loan origination system. And there's definitely there's different competitors out there. But one that started to bubble to the top is a company called nCino. It's built on Salesforce. When we said we wanted to do cloud at M&T Bank, everybody looked at you a little cross-eyed and was like, absolutely not. We have 2 data centers, we run everything on-prem, you are not putting anything in the cloud. We don't even have a policy for cloud. So that really kind of spiked a change in the organization. And a lot of groups, engineering, security, they all had to kind of scramble to put together some kind of cloud decision matrix of how would we do it, when would we do it, what would be stored out there. But the product we looked at was the best product in the marketplace. So what we realized is that we couldn't limit ourselves. But what we realized is, well, that cloud solution needs to communicate back to our internal systems, our internal API services, and we need to communicate to that. Well, how do you do that securely? API gateway seems like a good idea. So as part of the solution design, that started to say, when we were putting that together, is we need an API gateway. We need a partner to do this. And this was early on as we were evaluating. The next middle box there is what we do today. It's mobile. We do have a point solution in place. It's working fine, it's very secure, but it's not scalable. So the next use case is, what happens when the next app comes up, like, or product or feature like P2P or something like that? How are we going to secure those new services? Are we just going to continue to build on something that probably won't scale? Or should we be looking again at another opportunity for an API gateway? And then the third one, which is a little bit more of that omni-channel. I know I show branch up there, but one of the new features that we're looking to do is leverage e-signatures within our applications. And that means that's another cloud-hosted vendor that we need to integrate securely with their APIs, and how are we going to do that? And this one just depicts that we can do that within the branch, certainly do that with mobile, but this is just kind of at a high level, kind of talking about conceptually some of the different layers, the different channels, and the different business units that may be consuming our services, and then some of the core systems that they interact within. So again, these were kind of the use cases, and I'll have a couple more as we go down in detail, that started to justify the expenditure in an API gateway, which just wasn't one project or one initiative. So this is kind of what fueled a lot of that. And these are, when I talked about, the slide title was, solving real world business problems in banking. These were real problems for us, right? When our folks from TCF were up here, they talked a lot about, creating the APIs and the development lifecycle and all that's there. And I can say, I know we have a long way to go on that part, but we had a lot of exposed services in our traditional SOA environment that needed to be exposed and secure. So we kind of had a different part of the journey, and we still have to work on the other part, but this part was focused on how are we going to do this, and is there something that can help get us there quicker, faster, and more consistently? Not everybody trying to be a hero and do things one-off. It was about consistency. Let me jump off to the next slide here. I'm not going to talk too much on this, but one of the things that we were looking to leverage as part of the gateway is back to that Mint example, is that as we start to establish APIs like balance transactions, we want other third parties to be able to securely take advantage of those. And one of the, again, it's a standard out there, it's open, it is OAuth. And what we're looking to do, again, the gateway can help facilitate the ability for us to authorize third parties to access our services. So this is kind of important, and again, others can do this, but this is part of that strategy is how can others consume them. So this is just a little bit of what that is. And I'm not going to, like I said, go in too much detail. Kind of want to focus on some of the other business problems we're solving. So the next one here is I'm just going to kind of set up what credit lifecycle management is, and then Kevin's going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of how the gateway is helping us with that. So credit lifecycle management is really, it's our commercial underwriting, our risk, evaluating the risk, underwriting that loan, booking that loan, and then monitoring that loan over time. And that's the nCino product. So Kevin, I don't know if you can talk a little bit about how we're leveraging the gateway with the cloud solution nCino that runs on Salesforce.
Yeah, absolutely. So with this solution we are putting in place right now, with nCino being our first cloud product, we're incorporating and integrating, bring something out in the cloud, of course, and it's an external cloud, it's not a private cloud internally. So one of the first things is we got to make sure there's a secure channel or just a secure way of getting the request to us and requesting. So for those requests coming into us, we're going to use mutual auth for that, and this, the API gateway helped us out with that because it provides us a very quick, easy way of ensuring that mutual authentication. And additionally with that, one of the things we're working with, since nCino is on the Salesforce platform, the API gateway also offers a an adapter for Salesforce. And for the internal, the communication inbound to us, that doesn't help us out a lot, but where it helps us out a lot is actually all the interconnectivity going back out to Salesforce. And the reason for that, when you actually integrate with Salesforce from a call back out to them, you a lot of times are dealing with their objects internally. And those objects is basically coming in a couple different ways you can interact with them. You set up a connection, and through the gateway they offer a very quick way of setting up a connection to their data source. And from that point in time, you're really looking at something very similar to SQL. It's called Salesforce Object Query Language, which is very similar to SQL, if you're familiar with the normal, either Oracle or Microsoft-based databases. But with that, what it allowed us to do is actually establish the connection via external communication to Salesforce, be able to plug a query into that and retrieve information in more of an object form that we can represent within the gateway, and then write policy code off of that. The other thing it allowed us to do is more of an interactive mode with Salesforce. And what the screens, and this kind of, I have some screens up on here, but it doesn't show in a lot of detail, but with that, what it allows us to do for an interactive mode is actually you can select the object you want to interact with, whether that's an insert, update, delete, basically your CRUD operations, and it will perform actions based on that. And it allows you to variabilize that to a certain extent and interact with those objects within Salesforce. So it quickly allowed us to do that via this adapter that's embedded into the API gateway.
So a little bit of configuration over coding per se.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, another accelerator. Why do I want to reinvent the wheel? We all like to show how smart we are, but again, business outcomes, right? We want to do what's right for the organization as well as our shareholders, right? Effectively, leverage the money that they invest in our company to provide the right outcomes. So again, another example of how the gateway is helping with that. The next one is another project. It's cash management. It's one of our treasury offerings. It's for our commercial customers. We're replacing our current vendor. And one of the things that we are doing now is as we decouple applications, even though we may still buy vendor solutions, there are certain things we want to own versus letting the vendor own. So we don't want vendor-to-vendor integration. We don't want them to control things. So one of the big things that we're going to be looking at doing here is that we are taking over the authentication and authorization at least into the cash management platform. We want to control that. We don't want them to stick things in a database. We have a lot of investment in security technologies that we feel that we can better manage, provide a better experience. And as new things come up where we have to integrate other products and suite products into this and features, we now are in control. And so one way that working early with CA and some of their pre-sales and then some of their engineers and our security team was looking at how we could leverage the API gateway to basically secure a back-end application. And as part of Logon, I'll bring up this eye chart here, but what we were looking at, and this kind of goes to that ESB conversation, is where should orchestration be done? So I spent a lot of time working with different folks around the gateways is a great place to manage that authentication, to control it in a single location, to ensure that it's hardened, that I'm not leaving it in an application, for that application to have a backdoor, to be tampered with. The gateway is built for security. So what this is going through, I'll talk a little bit about this, is that we're using an LDAP to store the customer and their password. But at the same time, we have to orchestrate several calls. Some of those are certainly authenticating, user ID, password, right? But then in this world, we have a lot of fraud controls we need to do. So we have to make calls out to our adaptive authentication engine to determine, is this person logging in as they normally do? Is this a normal pattern? Is it a risk score that says I should challenge them? If so, what's my challenge method? Question answer. Is it going to be a hard token? Is it a passcode? What is it going to be? And then tell back to the application that, yes, you're going to challenge them, and oh, by the way, here's the method of challenging. Once they challenge, and hopefully successfully do that, we'll go down the happy path. They challenge correctly. Is there any other criteria that's part of our authentication flow? If not, great. Now you can hand over a token, a session, but only after the gateway and that flow has been fulfilled. So one area we're looking to use this is for security orchestration on that logon versus, again, this isn't orchestrating all these business services behind the scenes. There are services that Kevin's team and others will have, one for LDAP, one for RSA, but it's the gateway who's in control. Most importantly, the gateway is holding on to that token and will not hand over that token until it's been satisfied that you've met all the criteria. So again, another way of looking to do that, again, instead of building out things in various environments, setting up application servers, this is a way where we can effectively use the gateway to control something that's as important, which is security. So that's kind of what we're doing there. A little bit of different pattern, and cache management will also call, balance services and other things, but this is just a different way that we're looking to use it. Kevin, I know you maybe talk a little about how the organization is set up today.
I think an important part of any scenario you bring and introduce a new technology, a new product into the environment is to really establish the organization around that and how it's going to be supported. And also, I think it's been mentioned several times about this conference that it's important to have the focus from an organization perspective to know where you're going with the technology and a product. The communication is important and critical to that. And so what we're driving this towards is really a governance committee to help with that communication, collaboration with the different parts of the organization and groups. And part of that governance committee is back to the same very basic groups that were involved in the evaluation of the product as well. So back to the security engineering teams, the platform services, enterprise architecture, and different teams getting involved in that from a governance perspective to control direction, roadmaps, those types of things, and have a way in and say into that of how it's proceeding forward for the long term. The other aspects I wanted to kind of drive out here a little bit, just to kind of explain directionally kind of where we're headed with that. We're also bringing in, you kind of noticed here the API and SOA. There's lots of talks about APIs and SOA and how that interrelates or how is it completely different, right? What we're doing is we're bringing those two together so that as we migrate and we move towards and directionally we may change a few things, or we actually take some functions that we did historically in ESB and we move those over, say, to the gateway or vice versa, and do those types of things, that the group is involved in those directions and discussions. So that's why we're bringing those two some very similar ideas, very different in a lot of ways, together to continue to move that forward. The other aspects of this is engineering integration, or also known as the security engineering. They will be managing the platform, the installation, and all that of the gateway, as well as the health of the environment. Platform services today does our same basic things around our ESB platform. As far as the development of the ESB service, the API gateway development, that we're going to keep those teams very closely linked together as well, so that just like the governance perspectives of this and the weighing in of the roadmaps, that we're keeping folks close together as far as the directionally of this, so that we make sure that while we start in our infancy of this this program and the technology, that we're not steering off track any which way at this point in time. And we expect to learn some things that we don't know today, of course, and from those to be able to move forward and continue to make better decisions as we move forward with that. But yeah.
Great. We want to leave a little bit of time for if anybody has any questions about anything we're doing or things we've thought about or